Health and government officials have warned about a spike in COVID cases in South Africa and also the possible reintroduction of harder lockdown restrictions. KwaZulu-Natal Premier Sihle Zikalala says a return to a hard lockdown is on the cards unless the country sees a decline in the number of daily coronavirus cases. What would that mean for an already decimated, a battered economy? I want to turn our attention now to Dr. Peter Baur with me, senior lecturer in economics at the University of Johannesburg, who's been applying his mind to this particular issue. Peter, good afternoon to you. Before we get to what might happen economically if we do go into a harder lockdown, I guess we're still quantifying the impact of the harder lockdown a couple of months ago.
Yes, absolutely. The reality is businesses have taken a lot of strain. We have also seen increases in unemployment across the country. This is, of course, then associated with problems such as the growing poverty situation that we're actually facing. Many people who have lost their jobs are finding it very difficult to get back into the labour market as it is, and businesses themselves are really struggling to ground themselves.
I ask you that question to set the background because what would a return then to a harder lockdown actually mean practically?
Okay, if I actually take a look at the corona cases, and of course us at the economics department at the University of Johannesburg, we are tracing and actually monitoring the situation. And in terms of the number of cases, we do notice that there are an increase in the number of cases. We also notice that there's been one major wave. We're not really convinced of the two-wave scenario at this point in time, yet we are finding that in the second half of the, well, at least in the trailing tail, there's much thicker activity. In other words, there's a lot more variance actually taking place in the market. In terms of volatility, it is absolutely increasing, and we are seeing a slight increase in that. As I mentioned, the cases are increasing. So in terms of the COVID, it is a situation we are facing. We are taking cognizance of that. But we also need to realize that the South African economy at this point in time has been so decimated in the last few months that we can't afford to do another lockdown. It would actually really be devastating for business. I think it would be devastating for unemployment situation. And of course, we're looking already at negative growth rates. And probably if we take a look at the expanded definition of unemployment, we're going to be going over the 50% mark, possibly if not at the end of this year, beginning of next year. And then recovery 2022 and very low levels of economic growth only then. So I don't think a lockdown is actually a good idea at all.
I'm sure that a lot of businesses would agree with you, but having done the trajectory analysis as far as COVID is right now, you would in many ways be making a case for a harder lockdown. It's a difficult one for government. So how do you return to a harder lockdown with perhaps more equitably than we've seen in the past, where we're preventing or we're guarding against lives lost, but we're also making sure that we cushion the economy?
Yeah, we're facing two very different problems right now. On the one side, we're looking at a global economy, especially when we take a look at America and Europe, which have been also very heavily impacted by this. We are seeing growth taking place in countries like China, and as long as we could try and grow with other growing economies, would be an opportunity for us. But as long as the global markets, in the last couple of weeks, we've seen global markets actually slowing down, and that, of course, is going to actually negatively impact on us too. We need to free up our businesses. We need businesses to be able to continue to produce goods and to create job opportunities as well. We cannot survive on the savings as it is. I think household savings are well past 0% already in the moment. And if you take a look at our rand, even though our rand seems to be recovering, I think it's more case of what is actually happening in the European Union and the financial markets in America. So the reality is where we're sitting right now, we can't afford to lock up our businesses. We'd rather put in more stringent rules in terms of distancing, operating hours, work environment, making it compulsory to wear masks, which I think most South Africans are doing anyway, voluntarily. But we do need to make sure that we allow businesses to continue to operate. We cannot, I repeat, we just cannot tighten up on the business sector as we are.
The trouble with your argument, of course, is you can introduce those stringent rules, but in many cases, not only in this country but around the world, they are increasingly being flouted.
Yes, I think in South Africa, just talking from what I see, is that in South Africa there seems to be a large degree of responsibility taking place. But in other countries, and we've seen in Europe, there were whole protests about wearing the masks. And I think that they are crossing different kinds of arguments. On the one side, they're arguing for rights. On the other side, we're ignoring the impact of COVID. And so I think that we know that masks work, we know that COVID is real, and I think we really need to really enforce it. And the European economies, what we've been tracing, as well as, some places in the States, masks are important and they should be worn, and there is a huge drive to encourage people to be more sensitive to the issue of COVID. Overseas as well.
All right, just a final question. Again, in the realms of speculation, and I need to stress that this is just talk about a return to a harder lockdown. No one has actually said anything about us returning to that. But should that happen, given the parlous situation that South Africa's economy finds itself in right now, how long could the economy survive a tougher lockdown, do you think?
Actually, to be pretty frank, those figures we're not exact. I have not forecasted that to the point at this point in time. But if you take a look at just government debt to GDP, we're heading well over the 80% mark, and probably by the time we get to next year, we'll look at soon at about debt to over 100% debt to GDP. In other words, we're basically we can't really afford this. If this continues, given the current market environment, for example, the impact of Moody's and other global, shall we say, scenarios that we've had to face, if we continue to face global economic challenges that we've had over the last few months, we will experience increasing pressure, and that's going to affect businesses in a very, very bad way.
All right.
It's not just within South Africa; it's a global problem.
All right, Dr. Peter Baur, thank you for joining us, a senior lecturer in economics at the University of Johannesburg.